today is the lovely Rachel Harris, a personal development coach and the founder of Realize. I'm now going to get you to introduce yourself, Rachel.
So, hi, Faith. I'm really lovely to see you today. So, yeah, my name is Rachel Harris. I am a leadership development specialist and coach and former senior police leader. So now I work extensively, really, within the leadership sort of field. But a lot of my sort of career in the police really helped me with understanding, how we lead people in complex and high pressure environments. So that's really what I'm doing now. I work with a number of organisations around leadership, but I also work, and one of my big passions is working in women's personal development. So I do a lot of that now as well. So yeah, that is a very short version of what I do, Faith, and I'm sure that I know that as we go through the questions, we're going to come on to that and what that means in a bit more detail.
One of the things I wanted to ask you in our conversation is what would you like our listeners to take away from our conversation today, if there was one big takeaway in terms of what they're going to learn from yourself?
How important it is to be self-aware. That's the really big thing for me, because that is the one thing that people can control, can develop, can help them to really change their lives, change direction. It supports relationships, busy, complex lives. So for me, really understanding and having a strong sense of self-understanding really is the strong sort of foundations, I think, for any kind of personal growth and what people want to get from their lives living authentically.
Fantastic. And I also know that your company's name is called Realize. What does it mean, and how did that name come to you?
So it was like a really bad episode of The Apprentice for anybody that's watched that, where they know that they're going to be asked to name their company and nobody seems to be able to do it. And it was so true for me, because I had lots of different titles going round in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I eventually settled on Realize, because I was trying to find something that helped people understand what personal development was. So the leadership and the coaching side was fairly easy, because people, they know what that is. But when you talk about personal development, not so much. And Realize was good because I think it was finally finding a word that meant that people could realize where they are right now, in the fact that no one starts from nothing. Everyone brings experience, life experience, work experience at home, but also realizing what their future potential can look like as well. Instead of having to think, actually, I want to develop myself, or I want to look at leadership or coaching, but I'm starting from nothing. So that's where, Realize came from, and really, important for me as well as part of that journey.
And how did the journey start for you? Because I know you worked in the police. So before you started your own business, what did you do before that?
So I originally started out, actually late 80s, early 90s in retail in Sainsbury's. And I always wanted to be a police officer. So I applied, but I left it a little bit later, because I didn't want to go in too early, and it was important for me to have a bit of life experience, and obviously retail definitely gives you that great grounding in terms of how you communicate with other people, how you work as a team, and I was a leader there as a manager in Sainsbury's. And then I went into policing for just over 25 years. So I did a variety of roles there. I said that really sort of started to sort of establish for me that how do you deal with leading yourself and other people in complex, difficult situations. And throughout that time, I got really interested in the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So, looking at self-awareness in a little bit more detail. I studied that. I did coaching qualifications, my leadership qualifications, and worked for a fairly big chunk of time in the learning and development, both delivering and then later on, as I was promoted into a more sort of strategic level as well. So was really interested in that, really fascinated in how I could develop that, using that sort of, initially within the policing environment. So when I left, I really wanted to be able to develop that further, to use that and to help, more people when I left the organisation.
So during that, did you have any challenges at all, or was it pretty much straightforward?
Yeah, they're definitely not straightforward, Faith. Far, far from it. So, from a personal development perspective, really, policing is like any other organisation. It has its challenges. Clearly, policing comes with some, pretty big challenges, in terms of trauma and what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and also how you keep yourself grounded and how you're being authentic, how you're developing. A lot of those challenges for me were as I went through the organisation, and you suddenly, you're not responsible just for yourself anymore. You're responsible for other people. Your teams, how you're leading them. So for me, a lot of the challenges as I went through were health wise. A lot of the time as well, you're sort of battling that, and how you then maintain your own sort of self-awareness as well, and don't lose sight of that, and how you then sort of develop yourself and other people in the times when they're tough.
Amazing. So you've worked with people for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So what is the biggest shift you've seen in terms of how people approach personal development today? Do you think it's changed a lot, or do you still think it's the same?
I think it's definitely changed, and as I said, we would need a whole podcast to go through my career in policing, because I did a lot and was there for a really long time. But one of the things that really, as I said, interested me was personal development, because that was the one thing that you can control. And I think the biggest shift is that people have more access to information now than they did before. So that means there's definitely more awareness, but I also think that there's more noise as well. So people are exposed to so many ideas about how they should grow, how they should improve. And actually that can then become a little bit overwhelming. So they become less clear about themselves. So as I sort of worked through and progressed and used a lot of the tools as part of my sort of work around personal development, it was how I could help people sort of cut through that noise and focus on what actually helps them, how they operate naturally and what they need. So I think people are definitely starting to realise now that authenticity is the key, but they're not always able to know where to start with that. So, some work environments have very strong cultures. It's difficult. It's sometimes in that setting for people to know how to be authentic, because that can be quite overwhelming. They start second guessing themselves and trying to maybe fit themselves into leadership models or company expectations that don't really suit them. So they're still isn't as much emphasis on personal development because that's often hard for people and companies to quantify the results. So, if you're going to ask people to, pay for personal development, and obviously they don't need to do all of that, but it really helps. And to a certain extent, you can deal with your own personal development on your own. You can do the research, you can do the reading, but it often requires support, either internally through work coaching or mentoring, or for somebody like me, because the reality is it provides so many benefits, but if companies can't quantify them, it becomes difficult, because it becomes potentially expensive for them. So I try to help people see that the benefits that they're going to get from that. And I think that that's the shift that we're starting to see with people, is that they realise actually that there's nothing wrong with them. And we're moving away from this idea in personal development it's about fixing people. It's not. Sometimes people just need time and space to identify their own strengths, their own development areas, for example, how they like to learn, how they take in information, how they communicate with other people to support them.
Would you say, because of everything going on within our environment now, would you say AI is kind of affected those things or not
Oh, yeah.
really?
I think it has, because I said I think it's part of that noise
Noise,
that
okay.
people can access such information. And the good part of that is people can work independently. So, there might be something that you want to work on, but I think we're all learning and battling in different ways with AI, because it brings us so much stuff. So it really helps us. It's not going to go away. We've got to embrace it. But also it can be quite limited in what it does for people, and I think that's the difference. It's a useful tool, but you really has to be sort of a human element still in there. I think to use it sort of productively, and certainly not. I think personal development, it needs some support. I think to human support. I think because people need feedback. They also need some people sometimes, just to listen to them, and from a
Yeah, the human
coaching perspective,
interaction.
absolutely,
Yeah,
because you know as well yourself that with coaching, it's not necessarily about telling people what they should be doing. It's about listening and asking the right questions, and you can't get all of that from AI. That's the reality.
definitely. So I was going to again ask you, because you emphasize so much on self-awareness as a foundation. What are some of the practical ways someone can start building that self-awareness in their
Yeah.
daily life?
So I am really passionate about this self awareness, and I don't want it to sound really simplistic, because actually we know that it's not. Sometimes it can be really hard, it can be really complicated, and somebody really needs to be on board with that it's not always going to be easy, but it's so important, and I've seen time and time again what that brings to people
Yes.
when they start to sort of notice simple things, like noticing patterns of things that they're doing. So practical ways that people can sort of start to notice these patterns is asking themselves questions at the end of the day. So that might be, what gave me energy today? When did I feel really connected with something, really happy? What environment was I in? What's really drained me today? When was I not, at my best? When did I feel most like myself today? So even those small questions can be a useful starting point on a reflection, because that helps us to identify how we naturally work. So do I feel really drained when I'm surrounded by people in an open plan office? as an example. It's such a simple one that people don't consider.
Yeah.
And then when you say, well, have you tried sort of, step away? Is there somewhere else that you can work, or do you have the ability to be able to work from home from time to time? Because actually you might find that it's too noisy for you. It's a simple thing. So getting people to have that sort of starting point can then develop a deeper understanding of yourself, really. So that's one thing I think that people can do. These small things build up awareness really quickly.
Yes.
So, another thing is how sort of self-coaching check-in at the end of the day. So what went well for me today? What did I learn about myself today? Or, even noticing reactions in real time is a really powerful starting point, because once you start to notice the patterns, you can add to it. So you can catch yourself in the moment, those things like what's happening right now. Why am I reacting like that? So building our emotional intelligence as part of our self-awareness. So if I've been in a meeting and I felt frustrated, is that because I needed time to think, but somebody asked me to answer that really quickly and I couldn't? Did I feel overwhelmed because actually I needed more clarity? So that then helps us to move from reacting to understanding to choosing what we want to do. So I think those simple things can be really helpful. What do you start to notice about yourself? And I think that sometimes what people get wrong perhaps is they try to overanalyze themselves, every single thing, label themselves, or try to fix things that they perceive need fixing too quickly. And actually that slows that process of self-awareness down, because if you understand yourself, it then also becomes slightly easier to start to understand other people.
That's so true. In your experience, what tend to hold people back and from making those changes?
So my experience is definitely one of my own personal experience as well. It's about not trusting yourself. Yeah. So often people have done what I think I did, when I reflect on it often, is you spend years adapting to what you think you should be. Yes. So be that in work or relationships, don't you? And you lose touch with your natural instincts. And I know you asked me this in the beginning about some of the challenges. For me, as a woman who went through COVID like everybody else, terrible time, but that was also the same time as when the menopause started for me. So these are often things as well that we forget, then stop us reflecting on ourselves and being self-aware, because we are not connecting with ourselves. We are then maybe trying to adapt to these situations, make changes. We start overthinking, looking at different places for answers. So often it's not about a lack of ability, it's that lack of self-trust, but also being aware, emotionally aware of what am I going through right now that also might be affecting how I think about myself, my own self-esteem, my own confidence. And how do I get myself back to how do I operate naturally? Because if you know that, you can anchor yourself and that confidence can start to come back. So we're not being held back by fear, self-doubt, or stories we're telling ourselves. And those we know, and people hear this all the time, but it's so true. We forget that those internal narratives can be so powerful unless we consciously make time to think about where we are right now, to reframe when it's necessary, and sort of get ourselves back to those good habits, which prevent us then from feeling like we can't do things. And finally, I think the biggest thing that holds people back, that again is really simple, and again I've done it myself time and time again, is we forget to celebrate the achievements and the wins, even the small ones. Even the making it through a really long week where there's been so much stuff coming at you, because we're not just dealing with one thing, are we? We're not just dealing with work or home. It's a combination, and we forget to say to ourselves, I did really well today. I've done something today that I've never done before. I finished a qualification, and women especially, um, a big passion, as you know, is the Springboard program, licensed trainer for Springboard. And the amount of times that I will hear women say, oh, it was only, or it was just, and then you ask them what it was, and it will be something like they've just become a university lecturer, or and I'll go, only, oh, it was only just, you just got a master's degree. So yeah, I think that's also a thing that we forget to do, is celebrate the successes.
Yeah. I think you've already kind of mentioned this, but this question I'm about to ask you was from someone, and they wanted me to ask you specifically. Is that helping people to realize how amazing they are? What do you think so many people, or why do you think so many people struggle with their own self-worth?
So, a lot of the work that I've done primarily over the last few years whilst running the company, but a lot of it was while I was in policing, because a lot of people struggle with self-worth because they learn to measure their value by external things. So successes, promotions, relationships, appearances, productivity, or, other people's opinions. And over time, they start believing that their worth has to be earned that way, instead of something that they already possess. So, and me included, I've done this, again, and this is where a lot of our experience comes from, doesn't it? That when we fail or get rejected, we compare ourselves to other people, and that sort of sense of value starts to collapse. And whilst self-worth is different from confidence or self-esteem, confidence is believing you can do something well. Self-esteem is often tied to how positively we evaluate ourselves, because that self-worth is much, much deeper, isn't it? It's
Yes.
that, believing that you matter and you deserve respect, regardless of where you are within, your organisation or your career or your life, or that performance, not needing that just for that validation. And I think a lot of people haven't really had an opportunity to consider that as a distinction. And when we think back to, when people grow, when you're growing up, you're raised often as well, mainly on achievements. So those, you've won, and I think that is starting to change now. But certainly when I was at school, and that was a long time ago, it was, achievements were praised, weren't they? Or you were heavily criticised or surrounded by. And now there's a big, I think, comparison culture, isn't there? Of, you only feel good enough when you're succeeding. And, our generation now, or the generations that are, very much sort of social media, that also, you're sort of comparing yourself to people on social media. So part of helping people realise how amazing they are also helps them to separate who they are from what they produce, or how others respond to them is really important.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask a quick question. So I know earlier on when we started our conversation, you said you only coach women. Why is that? Have you ever coached men, or is
Yeah, I
that
do.
just a
Yeah,
decision? Or
yeah, yeah. I do both. And to take a term from the Springboard program, and but borrow this with pride, that often we feel, sometimes that there will be this, people say, well, why more women's development? That's not being sort of anti-men, it's pro-women. It brings me joy, it brings that passion. I do coach and I also train men, a lot of the time. But for me, when you're dealing with women, often we still come from this place of sort of lower self-confidence.
Mhm.
And when you see the joy of the changes with women, not just in the Springboard program, I do a lot of others, women's development. It's just it's very different because, and I know we don't want, we're not going into this in too much detail today, but it gives women an opportunity to have their own voice in a surrounding, and all that, or a coaching perspective or a training perspective where they then get an opportunity to think, because we do tend to start looking after other people within the group, if it's mixed. But I like coaching women specifically when we're doing one-to-one, because I suppose as well, for me, a lot of the time I'm coaching women who are in policing or similar organisations, and I can relate to some of the difficulties and the challenges that they have.
So, going back to that, so how do you tailor your coaching program, for example, to an individual when they come to you with this? Do they come with a specific problem, or?
Yeah, so I do. It's varied really,
Okay.
because I do a bit of career coaching. So sometimes I'll have people that come to me because they want to either sort of reset where they are or consider what else they might want to do. So there's I do a part of that. A lot of leadership coaching, because of the organizer. I still work with a lot of policing organisations, so I still have a lot of policing contacts where people will come to me because they want to progress in the organisation. So variety of reasons. For some people, they're coming up to pre-retirement, and they simply sort of want an opportunity to be able to think about what next steps might look like for them.
Yeah.
And how they can sort of move forward with confidence. So, yeah, it really varies. I do some within organisations as well, but the beauty of coaching is it helps people sort of second guess where they are and sort of trust themselves. So you can start to sort of one-to-one coaching, just go a bit deeper with people than you would, when you're working really with an organisation.
So we, as you know, we live in a fast pace.
Mm.
Yeah, we live in a fast pace, and often people feel overwhelmed. What are some of the habits people can adapt to protect their well-being in terms
Yeah.
of?
It's when I listen to people sometimes, when, especially if I'm doing sort of one-to-one coaching, and I'll listen to what they've got going on in their lives, not just at work, at home. And
Yeah.
it's so much. Yeah. So one of the most important things, I think, is understanding that, wellness for a start, isn't it? One size doesn't fit all. So what helps one person recharge might drain somebody else. So it's always a good starting point when I do any coaching, is just start to look at where people are there. But a few habits that work for people generally, starting to notice early stress signals. So not just when you're overwhelmed. So how can they start to take short pauses during the day to reset, even if that's only a few minutes? Because with some people, look at their calendar and it's completely chock-a-block from 6 in the morning till about 9 o'clock at night. So we've got to be realistic and practical. So, what are people's priorities based against that? So how we can help people sort of manage things, what's urgent for them. Helping people understand that giving themselves permission to walk away and go and have a break, do a bit of mindfulness, be that walk the dog round the block for something, is possible, and how do they make that possible? And simple things that they can do consistently to make a difference. So setting boundaries, that's a really big one. I've worked with a lot of executives now who now will be much, much clearer on this is the time I'm setting for lunch. Don't put things in my diary for that half an hour. For that half an hour, I'm taking that break. So they can limit a bit of that digital noise as well. You know, how do you do that for you that fits into your life? So some people who work from home, there might be a bit more flexibility. Other people who might be in offices can't do that.
Mm.
And one key thing that I would say is surrounding yourself with people who can support you as well, not tear you down. It sounds like a really obvious one, but getting that support network around you as well so that you
Mm.
can identify those steps for well-being.
But
Um,
what
yeah,
about
so,
if people don't have that? Where do they start from? Because you read a lot of articles about people feeling
mm,
lonely,
yeah,
having that connection. So where do they
yeah,
even start from when if they don't have that around them?
yeah. Great question. And I think for everybody, it's different. So taking an opportunity to start and think, okay, where am I going to get this support network from? Because so if you don't particularly like sort of um, being in rooms full of lots of people, you might be able to sort of take an opportunity to, well, what online groups can I join?
Mm.
Can I go and do things that are not work related, like joining, local book clubs, stuff like that. But starting from a place of what do you enjoy, who do you want to connect with, that's important as well, because that gives you an opportunity to think about, well, what do I need, what do I want to do, be that is your core thing there actually I want to support, not necessarily at work. It might be outside of work. It might be that I want to get fit, but I don't know where to start and I don't have anyone to help me with that. So you might do sort of your online research and then look at different things that suit you. So it might be, I don't want to go to the gym, or that's not the environment for me. So is it connecting with people in a different space? So going to the swimming pool or joining a walking group, that kind of thing, I think.
Amazing, amazing. And do you have any? Well, you don't have to share, but a success story from how you've helped someone in terms of their personal development and changing them around.
This is such a difficult question, and
Yeah.
one that somebody asked me fairly recently, because I have been uh, very fortunate in some of the work that I've done in terms of having opportunity to work with a wide variety of people, and a lot of that work has been with women on personal development programs. But I think for me, what really stands out isn't just one person; it's the pattern that I see time and time again. When women come in and they doubt themselves, they question whether they're good enough. They're often shaped by the environments that they've been in. And often these are male dominated or influenced by culture or these health challenges that I've spoken about. And then something shifts and they start to understand how they think, what they bring, what's always been there. So they realize that. You see them speak up more, trust their decisions, back themselves in a different way. And at that moment, when someone realizes, actually, I can do this, that always stays with me. And that's why I do what I do. One that did stand out for me during a springboard program was when a very well qualified, very well established woman who was on the program, but really doubted her own confidence. And she didn't want to speak for the first 2, 3, I think, programs. And then by the fourth program, I asked a question. I didn't ask for anyone to specifically come up. and she just rushed to the front of the group and she answered that question and she gave her own example, and it was amazing because for her that was a real breakthrough moment. So there are so many, and I'm so fortunate because I've seen so many of these, but that's really, as I said, why I do what I do is seeing that and seeing how people progress like that.
So, if somebody was listening to us today and they were struggling with their role or the stage they're at right now, what would you say to them? What is the first step they should take, to have
So
courage?
yeah, yeah. We often people don't have, and I work with a lot of organisations that don't have big learning development,
Yeah.
departments anymore. So I will go in and help them and provide a lot of the leadership training or the coaching. But the advice I'd give for somebody who independently for that is, if you can, I would definitely, definitely recommend getting some coaching. Get professional coaching because it starts and it helps you with that understanding of yourself. So before you do anything, before you try to think of this perceived need to fix something, start first with understanding why you might feel stuck, because often that's not the reason that people think it is. So they'll try to make these really big changes straight away, be it a new job, new goals, without that clarity. So that can create more confusion. So I always say to people, start small when everything feels really uncertain. Don't try to figure it all, your whole life out. Just focus on one step and ask yourself this question: what's one thing I can do this week that moves me forward towards that? So it stops becoming overwhelming, because you can do some of this on your own. Then make one small change that you can do yourself. So you can write out some pretty simple things, on a piece of paper, choose one small realistic action that's going to support your well-being this week. That might be it. So number one might be the area I am going to focus on is. Then your second question, one small action I'm going to try. And then how will I know that it's helped me? So that's the first thing that I always say to people. That's just sort of starting point. Do things that make you uncomfortable regularly. It might be terrifying, but that confidence lives just outside your comfort zone. So you need to get out of that. So if it's public speaking, try speaking up in a meeting. Try a new skill, a new hobby. Often, we have these blind spots, don't we, that we don't know what we don't know. So give something a go. Try talking to somebody you don't know that well. You don't need to take big leaps. You just need to take these consistent small stretches. They work better. That progress
Also,
over perfection, isn't it?
yes, and I think that's the mistake that a lot of us try to do. We try to take big steps instead of just
Yeah,
making little changes.
absolutely. We all do it. It's and it links back very much to how we talk to ourselves. People always think, well, what do you mean I talk? Well, I do actually talk to myself, because having those conversations out loud with yourself.
Yes.
So most people destroy their confidence with their inner voice, don't they? So instead of "I'm bad at this," let's try shifting that to "I'm still learning this." Really simple,
Yeah.
but we have a quick reframe. Removes that fear, doesn't it? Focusing on our effort, not our outcome. I heard once, and that was in a sort of gym setting. So confident people, aren't always successful. They just keep trying. So instead of asking, "Did I succeed?" ask, "Did I show up today?" That's
Yeah.
the important thing, because really building competence in something specific helps us deal with that confidence. So it's not general, it's tied to a specific skill, isn't it? Like studying or, speaking up in public. But all of this starts with, how do we know ourselves? Because to go back to even the simple things like how do you make decisions? How do you communicate with people? Often people don't know that. So that's a really important sort of starting point, I think.
Amazing. So we're coming towards the end of our questions or conversation, and I always ask my guests this question: is what are your non-negotiables in terms of your values? 3.
Oh, so for me, it's definitely courage, because that's the overarching things of a lot of values that I have. So part of that, doing the right thing, integrity, helping others, standing up for people. It sounds really cliched, but that, and I've heard this where people have spoken about this many times. What do you want to leave in the room when you leave it? I want people to know that I would ask the right questions and stand up for what's right. Definitely that, as a value is so important to me, because family, obviously, and then what fits under that in terms of doing the right thing for them as well, and supporting them, and how they feel, and doing the right thing for me, and definitely honesty, because this again links to, you can't be authentic if you can't be honest with yourself and other people. And I could talk about values for forever. I love it, because again, it's one of the things I always start with people. If you want to ground yourself in your own self-awareness and understanding, you have to know what guides you. You have to know what your core values are and what's important to you, and what you will not compromise. Obviously, at the end of the day, isn't it, Faith?
Amazing. And finally, if our listeners wanted to contact you, where can they find you?
So all of my details are on my website, which is Realise Development Services. So my email is on there, which is Realise Development Services at gmail.com. But that's, sorry, Faith, I think I've given you the wrong email address. You'll have to edit that bit out. I can't even remember my email address. I'll make this easy. So on my website, my email address is on my website at Realise Development Services. I'm also on LinkedIn. So you can find me on there. I also have Instagram and Facebook under Realise Development Services.
Amazing. I mean, with regards to our conversation, all your details will actually be posted.
Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. Lovely. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yes, no, it's fine. Once again, thank you so much for honoring my invitation, and I am so grateful.